Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this program, which is the last in Bennington Museum's winter virtual series. I am Dina Mallory, the Director of Public Programs at Bennington Museum here in beautiful Bennington, Vermont. Our galleries are closed January through March, so we take this opportunity to present some virtual programs on a variety of topics. We're very excited that we are reopening on Saturday, April 1st, and admission will be half off of our regular prices all day during that day. Tonight, we welcome Callie Raspuzzi, who is the collections manager at Bennington Museum. Callie attended Colgate University and has a master's degree in museum studies from George Washington University. She's been keeping track of the museum's tens of thousands of objects, photographs, rare books, and archival items since 2004. She's responsible for making sure that all of those things are properly cared for and accounted for. And she often has the opportunity to take deep dives into some of those objects and the stories behind them, as she has with the history of the Walloomsac Inn. Callie is joined tonight by Megan Campbell, Vice President of Special Projects for the Preservation Trust of Vermont. Meg attended Syracuse University in Florence, Italy, is a graduate of Williams College, and holds a master's degree in historic preservation from the University of Vermont. We're grateful to Meg for joining us, and to the Preservation Trust of Vermont for sponsoring tonight's program, allowing us to bring it to you at no charge. Now, please join me in welcoming Callie Raspuzzi.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen here and get us going. So the Walloomsac Inn is, of course, one of our favorite local landmarks here in Bennington. And we tend to love our historic landmarks because they've always been here and we don't want them to change. Change is hard. But what we don't always accept is that history is not static and our historic landmarks do change, and some have changed dramatically over the years, like the Walloomsac Inn. So learning about this history can teach us a lot more than just about how the building itself has changed. It gets into a lot of really interesting stories that we're going to dive into now. We're going to start with Elijah Dewey. And in 1771, Elijah Dewey, here on the left, purchased an acre of land from Moses Robinson and built himself a nice house. In 1798, he had himself painted by Ralph Earl, along with his wife, his neighborhood, and his nice house. His house is in the background right behind him there in the window. And Dewey was clearly an ambitious man of means, and one of his money-making operations was to open a public house. In the 1700s, hotels, the way we know them today, did not exist. Instead, people with large houses would open them up and open their homes to the traveling public for a fee. The town government controlled who was allowed to open these houses and what types of alcoholic beverages they were allowed to serve. This is Elijah Dewey's license from 1778, allowing him to open a common tavern and to serve hard liquor. And one of the interesting quotes here, the second paragraph states, "These there are therefore to certify and declare that the said Elijah Dewey is hereby admitted, allowed, and licensed to sell by retail all and every kind of spirituous liquors to be drunk in his now dwelling house for the year ensuing, unless otherwise ordered by the General Assembly of the state, provided he always doth not suffer any unlawful game or games, drunkenness, or any other disorders to be committed in his said house, but that good order and rule be kept up and maintained therein." So, and this is signed by Moses Robinson and Simeon Hathaway, council members for the town of Bennington. And in order to get this license, he would have had to be nominated by someone in the town and then approved by the town council, and then pay a small fee before he was allowed to open his home, which you saw in the background of the portrait, as a common tavern. This is what the town of Bennington looked like in 1798, as portrayed by Ralph Earl. And in small towns like Bennington, these public houses also served as very important meeting places. The government, the court, the social functions were often carried out in these public taverns. And Dewey's Tavern was among the sites used by the legislature of the Independent Republic of Vermont when they met in Bennington. Vermont was an independent republic between 1777 and 1791 when it joined the US as the 14th state. And there were two other taverns that also housed the legislature, the Catamount Tavern and the State Arms House. There was a great deal of drinking that went on at all of these meetings. Americans drank a lot more in the colonial era than is recommended today. The water, by the way, was just fine. I mean, if you look at the landscape of Bennington here, water pollution is really not a problem, especially in rural areas. They just like the taste of alcohol. This is a close-up. So if you look at this map, this is painting. Monument Avenue is in the center, kind of going up the hill, and the Dewey's Tavern, or the Walloomsac Inn, as it's now known, is in the corner, or in the middle right there. This is a close-up of it. So this is looking at it from West Road. In the summer of 1791, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison both visited Bennington. They were doing a northern tour, trying to become familiar with the rest of, with the northern parts of the United States. And they most likely did not actually sleep at the Walloomsac Inn. They also didn't stay at the Catamount Tavern, which is the building in this painting. This was painted during the WPA by Leroy Williams for the Bennington Museum in the 1930s. They stayed with Moses Robinson. He's the one in the red cape here. And they certainly did meet with Elijah Dewey while they were in Bennington. They attended church services on Sunday at what's now the Old First Church across the road from the inn. It wasn't the Old First Church at the time. It was the meeting house before the Old First Church was built. So they most likely did meet with Elijah Dewey in his tavern, but they did not actually sleep at the Walloomsac Inn. After Elijah Dewey died in 1819, his widow sold the building to William Henry. William Henry was a wealthy local merchant, and he was living up in North Bennington near the Henry House, and he set up his daughter Maria and her husband James Hicks to run the business. James Hicks's family ran a stagecoach line between New York and Bennington, and stage stops were another really important job for local taverns in early America. Traveling and drinking went together in early America. Drinking went with pretty much everything in early America, including travel. Stagecoach travel in particular was hot, it was dusty, it was bumpy, it was not a good time. And Hicks' account book for the inn records many glasses of wine, rum, gin, brandy, an occasional beer, and an occasional cigar. Spelled, I don't know if there are any cigars on this page. He spells it for me. It's mostly rum, though, that he seems to be recording. And such habits led one foreign traveler to conclude that the American stagecoach stops every 5 miles to water the horses and brandy the gentlemen. So as a stop on the stagecoach line, the business does very, very well, and the Hickses really are doing very well for themselves here. And James Hicks enlarged the building in 1823. This is the back side of it. He added a third floor and a ballroom to the second floor, as well as a porch on the front. His assembly rooms in Bennington were not the only ones, but they seem to have been pretty popular. This is a invitation for Jedediah Dewey to a party at James Hicks Jr.'s assembly room in 1824. And at this point, the tavern was still identified as by the name of the proprietor. So this is James Hicks Jr.'s assembly room. It would have been known as Hicks Tavern. When he owned it, it would have been known as the Dewey Tavern or the Dewey Inn, if it was known by anything in particular. It did not become known as the Walloomsac House until 1848, which is when George Wadsworth Robinson purchased the building. And you will notice here that Walloomsac is spelled differently than the way we spell it today. This is not a typo painted on the front of the building. It's just the way he chose to spell the word the time. Spelling, particularly for non-English words, was not standardized in the early 1800s. So there was no right or wrong way to spell a Dutch word like Walloomsac. Robinson did not actually run the business himself. He leased the building to a series of different proprietors. One of them was Thomas Jefferson Albro. This is his advertisement here from 1858. In the 1850s, alcohol was no longer an accepted part of everyday life for Americans. The temperance movement had been gaining ground in the United States since the 1830s. And T.J. Albro actually knew this very, very well. He had been a member of the Old First Church in Bennington, and in 1838, he was excommunicated for choosing to sell liquor at his general store. Before he ran the Walloomsac Inn, he owned a general store in Bennington, and he made the mistake of actually advertising the fact that he was selling liquor in the local newspaper. And when the church fathers found out about this, they were not too pleased with him. If he had simply been a little bit more quiet about it, he might have gotten away with it at this point, but actually advertising it in the paper was a bit much. And this here on the screen is his acceptance of his admonishment from the church. But he tries to make a case that what he's doing at this point in time was not illegal. It was not immoral. He doesn't really think he's been doing anything wrong. He has to make a business like anyone else. There's a note on the back of it. It was voted not satisfactory by the church fathers. Whoops. In 1853, Vermont becomes the second state in the US to enact prohibition. Although it was dry on the books, prohibition was not successful in stopping people from drinking. And the Walloomsac Inn under T.J. Albro seems to have been one of the places to get a drink in Bennington. In 1862 and 1863, he's listed as an innkeeper, 8th class, on the IRS tax assessment list. And in 1864, he is listed as a retail liquor dealer. So I'm pretty sure that despite the fact that Vermont is a dry state, he's probably one of the places where people expect that they can go and get alcohol. Luckily for local taverns, there's a new market developing that doesn't only involve alcohol. Vermont was becoming a very popular summer destination in the mid-1800s. The arrival of the railroad in Bennington in 1852 meant that visitors could get here much more easily and much more comfortably than they could by stagecoach. So if we go back to this advertisement of Albro's in the Bennington Banner, what he is advertising here is his recently refitted and refurnished house. It's been refurnished in a thorough manner. He's prepared to receive proposals for a large number of summer boarders. Persons in the city who would like a pleasant place to spend summer months will find this village unsurpassed by any in Vermont. And at this house, they will find a comfortable home. No pains will be spared to make this house equal to any in Vermont. People wishing to engage rooms in summer should apply at once, that they may not be disappointed in securing them. There seems to have been a shortage of summer hotels in Bennington at this point. And he seems to do very well here too. In the 1860s, George W. Robinson built a two-story addition on the back of the inn. You can see it here on the right. This photograph was actually taken a little bit later. I don't know when the porch was changed from the two-story porch to the single-story porch, but you can see the little addition that he built on the back. Robinson did everything that he could to promote Bennington as a tourist destination, and even built a series of observation towers on top of Mount Anthony. This is the first one that he built in 1864. It fell over in a storm in 1870. He built another one. That one fell over a couple years later. He built a third one. That one didn't end up doing terribly well either, and eventually fell over too. Unfortunately for Robinson, his financial situation was not all that great. His towers were very expensive to build, and they were not necessarily all that lucrative. His creditors forced him to sell the inn at public auction in 1865. And it's here that you can really get a pretty good idea for what's going on here. This describes the size of the inn, the footprint, and describes that two-story addition that he had just built on the back. And the inn was purchased by Mary Sanford Robinson in November of 1865. Her husband, Alfred, was a cousin of George Wadsworth Robinson, and he served as the landlord. She paid $3,500 for it. It seems to have been a pretty good deal because business continued to be really good for summer visitors. The Bennington Banner ran a note in 1864 stating that there are quite a large number of strangers from cities sojourning in this town this season, but not as many as there would be had we more ample accommodations. We trust these will be provided before another year. With these accommodations, we know of no place more delightful to while away the hot and sultry summer months. With the finest scenery, pure air, healthy climate, and sparkling cool water that we can furnish, we very confidently look for a rush to our town. So it looks like Mary made a really good investment because there are a lot of very similar notes in the Bennington Banner in the late 1860s and into the 1870s, talking about how many tourists are coming here and complaining that some of them are going up to Manchester to go to the Equinox Hotel. They're not, because there simply aren't enough places for them to stay in Bennington. Vermont is very, very popular. And mostly people are coming because the cities, of course, at this time are not healthy, especially during the summer months. So anyone who can afford to get out into the country during the summer is going to do that. And Vermont already is gaining a reputation as a good summer destination. Shortly after she purchased the inn, the Robinsons added another addition, and this is now the middle part of the inn. And I think it's also around this time that the front porch was changed, and also a new sign was added. And in this case, Walloomsac is spelled the way we spell it now, and that sign is also currently in the museum's collection. It's right above the front door from the admissions desk. So next time you come in, turn around and take a look at it. If we go back to this photo, this was taken in 1866, so just after she bought it. And I think that the man in the carriage in front there is her brother Samuel Sanford. And in that case, I think that the girl sitting next to him is his daughter, Mary Sanford. Mary Sanford grew up to be a photographer, an amateur photographer, when she was young. And she is the one who took this photograph of the two of them on their porch on Monument Avenue many years later. This was taken in the 1890s, but that's Mary Sanford Robinson on the left and her brother Samuel Sanford sitting next to her. And they had a summer home on Monument Avenue on the brick house on the corner of Bank Street. The Robinsons seem to have done very well with the Walloomsac Inn, and the citizens of Bennington even wrote them this lovely note. And I don't know the date of this, it's probably shortly after they bought it though. And this says, addressed Mr. and Mrs. Alfred Robinson, the citizens of Bennington, ever ready to acknowledge a spirit of enterprise and sensible that every community derives a reputation from the character of its hotels, due in consideration of the very acceptable management of the Walloomsac House, tender you a benefit on any evening you may suggest. So summer visitors are good for everybody in town. So the town fathers are very aware of this and are definitely supporting the Robinsons in all of the improvements that they are making to the inn. Mary Robinson sold the inn to her brother Samuel in 1888, but she retained a use of a room in the building. Around 1890, the front porch was updated again with columns that it has today. And I don't think this one doesn't have the sign, never mind. Samuel Sanford leased the inn to siblings Walter and Elfreda Berry in 1891. Elfreda had experience working at the Hyggia Hotel in Fort Monroe, Virginia. So she's presumably an important part in this story, but interestingly, she gets very little credit. That is one of the very interesting things in the story of this inn is over half of the actual owners are women, but most of what you hear about this inn really only features the men, which I guess is an interesting historical note. But in finding information on the women who were involved is not easy, because Walter was more than happy, I guess, to take as much credit as he could. In all of the promotional material, it's Walter whose face and name is prominently noted, such as here in the 1899 brochure. The inn at that time was owned by both of them. When they purchased it in 1896, both of their names were on the deed. But like I said, Alfreda gets very little credit. In 1903, they added another large addition on the back to accommodate even more visitors. And the Berries continued to successfully promote the inn to city people who came up for the summer. Ads appeared in the New York and Boston papers, including this one from the Boston Transcript. Alfreda died in 1906, and Walter continued to run the inn on his own until he married Elizabeth Emma Galvin in 1921. At this point, he was 56 and she was 31. There was a large age difference there, but they seem to have done quite well. At this point, they're still advertising the inn as a place to get away for the summer months. I particularly like in this ad that they are claiming that every attention to comfort of guests is here. There's an excellent table. Hay fever patients exempt here. The Berkshire Hills nearby, beautiful drives, stable connected with the house. I'm not sure that the hay fever thing really worked out for anybody in my experience, but I'm sure it was better than whatever air they were breathing down in Boston in midsummer, hay fever or no. At this point in the 1890s, most visitors are still arriving by train. They're picked up at the depot along with their servants and many, many trunks of luggage. Most families come for the entire summer, and the men would often stay in the city to attend business, maybe come up and visit their families on the weekend. Because of the train, it's very convenient for people to do this. It's not the train service is very regular, and it's easy to take the train up from the city and then have the hotel carriage pick you up or hire a carriage to pick you up and bring you to the hotel. About halfway down on the left is the entry for Mrs. Theodore Roosevelt, one of the most famous guests at the Walloomsac Inn. So she is here, about halfway down there, along with Miss Roosevelt, 5 children more, and 1 nursemaid, which it seems to me to not quite be the ratio of adults to children that I would prefer, but apparently it worked for her. In 1894, when the Roosevelt family was here, Teddy Roosevelt was busy with his political career in New York City. And the story goes that the children contracted scarlet fever while they were in Bennington, and they were forced to quarantine here for an entire month. So I don't know exactly how long they were intending to stay to begin with, but usually at this period, people were coming up and they were planning to stay for a month. They brought trunks and trunks of luggage. They brought all of their servants, well, not all of their servants, they brought a couple of servants, they brought groomsmen, and the idea was that you were moving in for the season. So one of the really interesting things looking through the books is these guest registers is to see how there's a real shift from people arriving by train or by horse and then moving into the automobile era. So in this register from 1898, you have people arriving with 5 horses, someone arriving with 1 man and 2 horses, and then another one with 1 horse. The rest are coming in by train. So you also notice that the coachmen are not getting named here. The nurses' maids don't get a name. They also don't always get assigned a room. So in this case, they're probably either in the case of the nurses' maid, she's sleeping with the children. In the case of the groomsmen or the maids, they're probably sleeping upstairs in servants' quarters. And then if you look at a later register, this is from June of 1909, a lot of these people are arriving by automobile, and that people arriving by automobile, that number keeps going up as time goes by, and the number of people arriving by train and by horse continues to go down. They're still coming for the same reasons, though. The advertising still focuses on the natural beauty of the area, the healthy environment, and very also emphasized the historic significance of the area. Bennington has always been very conscious of its history, but in the early 1900s, they start putting up monuments and markers to everything that they can. And actually, this starts in the 1800s. The Bennington Battle Monument here was dedicated in 1891. It gets a full page spread in Barry's advertising brochure, and it gets a full page spread in the advertising brochure every single year. This one in particular is from 1913, but in the earlier ones, it's also prominently featured. When it was dedicated, William Henry Harrison, the President of the United States, came to Bennington and held his reception at the Walloomsac Inn. Barry was also very active in the town government, and he was instrumental in getting the town's sewer system in Old Bennington. The entire last page of this advertising brochure from 1913 is devoted to the sanitary improvements and the new sewer system in Old Bennington. So for a hotel of this size, you can imagine that a good sewer system is really important. And so he also makes a lot of bold claims here. He says that the ventilation of all rooms, new closets, excellent baths have been greatly improved and advanced beyond ordinary requirements for perfect sanitary effects. In fact, this is the very best known, and all improvements in this particular line are constantly added. So they're taking very good care of this place. They're doing everything they can to attract the very best clientele. An inn of this size, of course, does not run itself. The Barrys had a large staff, some of whom are pictured in this photograph taken in 1897. In the 1900 census in Bennington, the inn housed, in addition to the family, they housed 1 male coachman and 7 female servants who lived under the same roof. Now, none of them were the 2 Black women in this photo. I wish I could find who they are, but there are no identifications here. But interestingly, many of the people who were working here were either immigrants themselves or they were the children of immigrants. Many of them were Irish or Irish ancestry. This photograph was taken in 1897, probably the same time as the previous photograph. The year is over the fireplace there. And at this point, the inn really is trying to attract the most wealthy clientele that it possibly can. And they're doing pretty well at it. I mean, the Roosevelt family is not small potatoes. They are also attracting artists to the area. This art entry in Barry's account book is for Frederick McMonnies. He's a very popular artist of the day. This is from the summer of 1902. And while he was here in 1902, he was here September through October, paying $20 a week for his board. And while he was here, he painted Mary Isham Prentice on the left there. She's seated on the porch of her Monument Avenue summer home. And he also repainted May Palmer's beautiful Chinese robe. It was originally painted gold, and she did not like that color, insisted that he change it. So while he was in Bennington, he repainted that for her as well. This is the inn in 1926. This was taken during a street fair in Bennington. And take a look at the brand new sign that's up above the porch here. This is the one that is now hanging in the museum's education center. So again, the next time you're in the museum, come and take a look at it. I cannot find the exact date on this. I'm guessing it's somewhere around 1910 that it's put up, but I don't know exactly. After Walter Barry's death, his son Walter Barry Jr. took over the business. with his wife, Martha Pratt-Berry, and his wife continued to manage the inn after his death. After World War II, the hospitality world changes. So instead of coming for an entire summer, families are traveling for a week or just a few days even. And they're not really staying in quite the same places, but the inn continues to do relatively well. This is 1936. Again, the sign is up there. In 1953, Mr. and Mrs. Walt Disney visit Bennington, and they stay at the Walloomsac Inn. And there's a fun story. Supposedly, he didn't sign the guest register. And I've not been able to find his name in the guest register. But Martha Berry went out. She had 3 children at that time, and she went out and bought a couple of Disney books from the local store and brought them back. And he signed the books for the family. They, of course, got loved to death after that. They no longer exist, which is too bad. So the inn does not, this is not the Walloomsac Inn, of course. The inn does not do very well after this. People traveling by car tend to prefer modern motels. They prefer cottages. They want something where they have their own private entrance, where they can just drive right up to the door. And so things change drastically at this point. And the Walloomsac Inn, unfortunately, it doesn't keep up. People are not looking for the same grand experience that a historic inn like the Walloomsac Inn offers. And it just does not survive. But of course, places like Darling Kelly's, charming as it is, don't have the same charm that a historic place like the Walloomsac Inn does. It closed after the 1986 season, has remained in the family ever since then. And of course, we do not know what is going to happen to the inn next, but we do know that the family is working with the Preservation Trust of Vermont. And so I believe Meg Campbell has some words for us about what they're doing with the inn now.
Hi, thank you, Callie. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we have been working with the Kaiser family since for not quite a year, understanding that this is their home. This is family home. It's not a public building, which presents a fair number of challenges, but we are very aware of the history of this building and how important it is, not only to Bennington, but to the state of Vermont, and even nationally, it's an important building. So we've helped them with a conditions assessment and connecting them with an architect to get a sense of, the kind of work that needs to be done on the building. And we've facilitated some conversations around planning for the future of the building. Most of those are confidential at this point. And at this point, it's not, there isn't really an opportunity for the public to be involved. They're, kind of going through their family process. But there may be a point in the future where the community could get involved. And if you're just dying to be part of that process, I encourage you to email me, and I'll just keep your name available. And if you have anything you want to ask or share, I'm more than happy to email you back. So my email's on the screen, and yeah, so that's about the status of things. And it's a little tricky. I know that the public is just dying to know what's happening and wants to know what it's going to become in the future, but there's a process that needs to be gone through, and it's really we're so grateful that the family reached out to us, and we want to treat them with the respect that they deserve in going through this process.
Well, thank you both. I would invite people to use the Q&A feature to ask their questions. I'm sure there will be lots of them, and we'll get to as many of them as we can before we run out of time. The first one, and I think, Callie, that you mentioned this, but I wasn't certain. Walloomsac, is that a Dutch word? And do we know what it means?
Oh, there is an article in the first Walloomsac Review, the scholarly journal that the museum started back, oh gosh, probably 15 years ago now. I believe it is a Dutch word. Exactly what it means is, I believe it's related to the Dutch word Walloon, which was, I want to say, a landowner. I'm sorry, I should have known that somebody would ask that. There have been some people claiming that it is in fact a Native American word, but I'm relatively certain that the conclusion that they came to with the Walloomsac Review in particular was that it was in fact Dutch. But there are a lot of different stories about where that word comes from and what it means and how it's spelled too. And like I said, it's been spelled many, many different ways, even on the front of the building.
And for those who aren't familiar with Bennington, the river that runs through Bennington is also called the Walloomsac River. So the inn, I assume, was named after the river.
I assume so, yes.
Yeah.
This was the Walloomsac River, the Walloomsac Valley. It was one of those words that evoked history. It evoked beautiful nature, a natural place where you could come and enjoy a variety of the best that Bennington had to offer. So I assume that's why they chose the name for the inn.
And no hay fever.
Supposedly.
Which you and I know is not true.
Yeah, sadly. Yeah.
What was the date of the death of Elfreda Barry? We have her great niece in the audience.
Ooh, it was, when did she die? 1906.
1906. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can probably get the exact date for you, but I don't have that written down.
I know someone has asked if the inn is designated as a historic site.
I think it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places as part of a Bennington, Old Bennington Historic District. I'm not 100% certain about that, but I would be very surprised if it's not.
Okay, that makes sense. So a couple of questions about the Preservation Trust. Give me just a minute here. Just sort of a general question about what exactly does the Preservation Trust do? And I don't know if you can answer this part or not, or if there's a chance that the Preservation Trust might eventually become owners of the inn.
Good questions. I'm sorry I didn't answer the first one when I sort of introduced myself, but the Preservation Trust helps communities save places, historic places that matter to them. So we've been in existence for over 40 years. We work all over the state of Vermont. We help with technical assistance. We help with grant funding when it's available. We also have retreats for communities at the Grand Isle Lake House, which is a property we own in Grand Isle, Vermont. We do advocacy work in the legislature. So we've supported a number of projects here in Bennington. So is there a chance that PTV would own the Walloomsac Inn? Highly unlikely. We own a few historic properties, but the circumstances in which we acquired them were quite different than the circumstances here. So we're not really in the business of collecting old buildings for our own ownership. We like to help communities figure out how to save and use those buildings and operate them themselves. So I think that answers the questions.
Yeah, thank you. So it's always helpful when our audience knows something we don't. Terry tells us that the Walloons were French Huguenots who emigrated to the New Netherland colony and northern New England in the late 16th and 17th century. So that's probably our answer. Thank you for that information. Let's see. Oh, someone had heard that Paul Newman once tried to buy the inn. I had not heard that. Can anyone confirm that rumor, or?
I've heard that as a rumor, but I've never seen any evidence that that actually happened.
All right, so it shall remain a mystery. Callie, do you know, or maybe Meg, how many guest rooms the inn had?
Another question that I should have looked up before. I want to say 26.
Okay, this is something we may be able to find out and add to the follow-up information. 26, you think?
That's a number that is rattling around in my head, but I might be wrong.
So someone else has asked a question that I'm sure a lot of people are curious about. Has an engineer gone through the structure to see what kind of shape it's in? How structurally sound is it?
I can answer that a little bit. We haven't had an engineer go through it, but we have had an architect go through, and it actually is more structurally sound than it appears from the outside. There aren't any significant problems with the foundation and the main structure of the building. So there were some portions of the building that were clearly in poor condition that were removed over the last year. There's like a summer kitchen that was removed, but so the answer is we haven't had an engineer, but others have looked at it.
And I think it's in better shape than we really imagined it would be. So that's good news. Like a lot of people, I've heard that it is brick under the clapboards. Is that accurate?
That's my understanding too.
Probably helped with the structural soundness of it. Callie, I wonder if you have come across any information about, aside from the advertisements, about what the accommodations were actually like. We have a guest whose grandmother must have stayed there and told us that it was always pristine and the linens were perfectly white. Have you come across any sort of descriptions from people that stayed there?
The only description I know from someone who stayed there comes from someone who stayed there in the 70s. And at the 70s, he reported that it was past its prime. But if you look at the ads from earlier, like in the brochures from the early 1900s, I would definitely believe that the linens were purely pristine, that everything was in tip-top shape, and it was attracting the like of Teddy Roosevelt's family. Like, this was not a fly-by-night operation. It was definitely a top-class hotel in its heyday.
Was the Walloomsac Inn ever associated with the Underground Railroad?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay.
But it's hard to prove those things.
Right. Thus the underground. So I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this question right. The question is, how out of date is the inn at this point? And I'm going to interpret that to mean in terms of like electricity and plumbing and sort of the modern amenities that we would expect. And maybe we don't know, or maybe Meg can speak to that.
I think it's fair to say that it hasn't been upgraded in many years.
All right. Yeah, and you said it closed in 1986, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can assume that it probably, at least the guest room portions of it, haven't been updated since then. Okay, here's a good question. And where did cars park? So starting in the early 1900s, automobile traffic started to pick up at the inn. There's no parking lot. There's no driveway even, really. Where did they go?
I've been wondering about that too. I believe there was a barn behind it on West Road because there was a stable attached to the inn at one point. I'm pretty sure it was back behind it because there was another house right next to it on Monument Avenue. And I would assume that after the stable was no longer really used for horses, that would have been converted to a garage for automobiles. But I don't know exactly, because I mean, one of the thoughts is that, if you were to use it for a hotel today, you would need parking, or if you were going to use it for anything, any kind of a public building today, you would need parking. And there obviously is no parking. So there, I think many years ago, before all the trees grew up, there must have been something behind it where people were able to park and keep their horses or cars.
Yeah, so Meg, one of our guests has raised the question of, could this be an inn again? I mean, there obviously need to be a lot of work done, and the parking situation is one of the challenges, but I know we can't speculate too much, but would that be a possibility?
Well, 10 years ago, people couldn't have imagined that the Putnam Hotel would be what it is today. So anything is possible as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And then there's a question about the planning or zoning issues. And I know, it's situated in Old Bennington, and there's lots of rules in Old Bennington. So that would have to be taken into account as well.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that. So.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the situation would be. Oh, good. Somebody looked up the National Register of Historic Places for us, and the Walloomsac Inn is on it. Fabulous, thank you. Well, somebody just made the comment. Her mother was Walter Berry's, a daughter of Walter Berry Sr., and said that the staff all came up from Florida hotels for the summer and then returned back to Florida in the wintertime. So that's interesting. Were guests fed while they were staying at the inn, especially those that stayed a long time?
Yes, there was a kitchen attached to the inn. They served, I believe they served 3 meals a day up through World War II, I think. And then they stopped serving dinner at one point and still served breakfast up until, oh gosh, I'm not going to get these dates exactly right, but I want to say up through the 1960s maybe, before they completely closed the kitchen. And I believe that was based on staffing as much as anything, and it just wasn't financially feasible after that point. But yes, they did have a kitchen attached to the inn, and you got meals with your room. That it was expected that with any of these large establishments that you came for the summer and they fed you, they housed you, they gave you pretty much everything you needed. It was a home away from home for the summer. So food was included, yeah. And they had the huge dining room as well. Up on I believe that would have been on the second floor where the assembly rooms were when James Hicks added those on.
So I was at the museum when you gave a presentation about the inn back in November, December, and I see that you've come across a lot more information and photos. I was really excited to see one of the interior photos, which I hadn't seen before. Do we have are there more interior photos that we know of or that we've seen?
I don't have a lot of interior photos of any building from pre-1900 are unusual. They're not the thing that people take pictures of on a regular basis because of the limitations of early photography. So it's remarkable that we have one of the interior of the inn from 1897. There are a few photographs floating around online of the interior from the 70s or 80s, but I've not seen a lot of others, no.
And we don't have any from the present day at this time.
I don't know.
What are some of the items from the Walloomsac Inn that are in the museum's collection?
Oh, we have a lot of advertising material. We have a lot of photographs of the exterior. We have a lot of postcards. A lot of the material that was created for the public. We also have early material related to Elijah Dewey. We have, of course, his portrait of his wife, and of the view of Bennington, which would have been in the Walloomsac Inn when it was still Dewey's Tavern, his house. We have other things related to Elijah that relate to the Walloomsac Inn simply because it was his house. We have things related to James and Maria Hicks, including the legend books. There was one that was included in the presentation, but we have a whole series of them. We have a few other things related to the Hicks family. We have a few things related to the Sanfords, and mostly just we have a lot of. I had a hard time picking photographs to use in this presentation because we have a lot of, and they are all of the exterior, not interior shots, but we have a lot of photos of the exterior over the years, which is really exciting. Most of them are from like 1880 onward, like 1880 to maybe 1930s. Really, when the inn was doing really well and when photography was really a thing. So there's a lot of that. We don't have an awful lot of pieces related to it when it was owned by the Berries. That's still, of course, owned by the family. But a lot of earlier material and a lot of photographs and advertising material.
If someone were interested in viewing some of the registries or finding out more about what was in them. So for example, I have someone here whose parents honeymooned there and just is curious to see if their names are in the registry. Is there a way for people to explore these more or get information?
Yes, if somebody wants to send me an email, and the registers are, as I said, still owned by the family, but we can certainly see if they mind if we let people look through them. But yeah, send me an email and I'd be happy to talk to you.
Wonderful. And Callie can be reached at collections@benningtonmuseum.org, I believe.
Okay.
I got that right? Let's see. Oh, the observation tower, the strange tower in the center of the building. What can you tell us about that?
Don't know an awful lot about that. That is not, I assume that was part of the 1903 edition put on by Walter Berry. But I did not find a lot of information about that. And it's funny because it seems like it would be one of the exciting features of the inn, but I don't know. I'm sorry, I wish that I did, but I do not know what the entire story is there.
Yeah. Or what its purpose was. I mean,
I assume it is an observation tower. You know, you walked up and you could, take a look around you and see all that old Bennington had to offer.
You could probably see, all of the town really from up there.
I would think so. I would think it would be a beautiful view. So you go up there and then you go up to the monument and you kind of see the other direction. It'd be
fun. Let's see. Oh, okay. Here's a comment from somebody. It was her grandfather was a fire marshal in Old Bennington, and his daughter said that he actually used it as a fire tower, so a place to check for fires. Seems like it would be a good use of it. So just to clear up any confusion, the current owners are descendants of the Berry family. It has stayed in that family. So oh, help me out. I've forgotten the first name now of Berry. George? Walter, thank you. Walter Berry Sr. Can you remind me again what year he bought the inn?
He bought the inn in, well, he and Alfreda, his sister, bought it in 1896.
Okay. So 1896, it's been in that family since 1896. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see, we've got just a couple minutes left. The ballroom. Do you know for how long that was used for events, or when it fell out of use, when it stopped being, and is it still there? It's gone, right?
Yeah, it was converted back into rooms,
okay,
guest rooms in, I want to say the early 1900s, but I'm not, I don't know the exact year. I'm sorry.
Okay. Do we know if there are any, well, this is a complicated question because yes, there are still furnishings in the house because people were living there until recently, until about a year ago. But do we know if any of the furnishings from any of the guest rooms or anything like that remain?
I don't know.
I see Meg popped back in. Do you have any information about that?
There's definitely furniture there, you know, whether or not it's original to the inn, I don't really know, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some, you know, original stuff there. But, you know, it's a big place.
Yeah. And before I get to the last question that I'm going to pop in tonight, I do want to mention that you know, somebody made a note about there's fences around it, and they were afraid that it was going to be destroyed or taken down, demolished, and you know, wondering about, you know, having signs that designate it as private. And I really want to emphasize that property is private. The fencing is around it to prevent people from trying to access it. There are signs posted all over it saying that it's private property and not to trespass. And really, if you hear of anyone who's saying, oh, let's, you know, go check out the old inn, see if we can get into it, anything like that, please tell them that not to do that, that it's illegal, and that, you know, they are keeping watch on it, and you know, please to respect the private property and watch from afar as the rest of us are. And it's exciting to see things happening there. So just to wrap up, I'm going to ask a question a couple of people put in the Q&A. Is the Walloomsac Inn haunted?
Ooh, maybe. Everyone wants to speculate that it is because it looks like a haunted house. It definitely gives off that vibe. I don't know that there have ever been any proven or reliable stories of hauntings. One of the Berry sisters used to say that they would go up there with a Ouija board sometimes. They'd come down and play with their Ouija board in front of the guests until their mother yelled at them because she was scaring people. But I don't think there have ever been anyone. No one's disappeared in the Walloomsac Inn that I know of.
I did hear that also from one of the sisters that when I believe it was Mary Sanford died, like she lived there until she died, that the room that she stayed in, they basically just shut the door and nobody ever really opened it again. So maybe she would haunt it. That'd be my guess. if anyone was going to. Well, Callie and Meg, thank you both so much. We've gotten a lot of thanks from our participants and appreciation for your time and your research. I want to thank Meg and the Preservation Trust again for sponsoring this program so that everyone could enjoy it for free. That said, I just popped into the chat a link if you would like to support Bennington Museum programming and help keep us bringing you these great programs. Feel free to click on that link and make a donation of any amount to our annual fund. And if you wouldn't mind just popping the word Walloomsac into the notes, we'll know that you're showing your appreciation for this event. Check out all of our events on benningtonmuseum.org. Thanks, everybody. And again, thank you to Callie Raspuzzi and Meg Campbell. Everyone have a great night.